and welcome to the webinar, More and Better Financing for Development Data. This is the fifth webinar of the series Beyond the Numbers, Harnessing Data for the SDGs, which is a joint initiative actually by Open Data Watch and PARIS21. Thanks so much for joining us today. If you are participated in the previous ones, welcome back. And if you're just tuning in, we are really glad to have you with us. My name is Sheda Badi, and I'm the Managing Director of the Open Data Watch, and I will be your moderator for today. Our organization is an international nonprofit organization working at the intersection of open data and official statistics. And our aim is, of course, to improve data quality and availability for official statistics for measuring SDGs. Today's webinar focuses on, as the title suggests, increasing and improving the financing for development data. And we all know that this is a big issue for us for pursuing the SDGs, and really need to work together on finding creative ways of addressing this issue. We have a great hour ahead of us, and we'll dive into all the intricacies of what we need to discuss with very, very distinguished guest speakers. And we will also hear from you, our audience, with any questions that you have. And here, just before I introduce our speakers and get into the substance of our conversation, I wanted to do a few housekeeping points. One is that it would be really terrific if you muted your microphone. If you would like to be on the video, that's fine, but otherwise you can also turn off the video. The webinar is being recorded, and the link and the video will be shared at the conclusion of the webinar, and it would be available on all the partners' websites. On the right-hand side of your webinar screen, you will see a tab, or sometime at the bottom, on your menu called Chat. And use this button, this space, for any questions that you may have. We will try to, as we go to the question and answer session, to filter and select a few of those questions and get the panelists to respond. If we do not get to respond, we will definitely post our response later on the website. There is through email. Lastly, we have an email for the webinar series. It's called one word, Beyond the Numbers webinar@gmail.com. If there are any questions, or if you want to reach out to any of us, of the speakers or moderator, me, we would really look forward to hearing from you and getting engaged with the conversation around this topic. So without any further ado, let me just jump into the discussions. As a point of introduction and getting into the subject of today, I just wanted to sort of say that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development for us represents one of the most ambitious efforts in history to bring people to poverty and create a sustainable world. It's estimated that $5 to $7 trillion is needed to finance the SDGs, with around 600 million per year needs to go towards data and statistics. Yet, as PARIS21 recently released Press 2019 reports found, international funding for data and statistics is only half of what it needs to be. And how can we change this situation? We will explore the issue with a range of perspectives, from country to donors from the advocacy perspective. Luckily, I will be joined here with our expert speakers who can help me to tackle this very important topic. Let me introduce you to our speakers. First is Johannes Schuding, who is the executive head of the Partnership in Statistics for Development in 21st Century, PARIS21. He's a trained development economist with a PhD from Humboldt University in Berlin, with specific expertise in employment, social protection, health insurance, and gender. And our second speaker is going to be Unzaya Ayush, who I hope she's online now, is the chairperson of the National Statistics Office of Mongolia. Ayush has extensive experience in sustainable development, regional and international cooperation, currently sharing as a co-chair of a high-level group for partnership, coordination, and capacity building for statistics for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This is a very important high-level group at the UN. And then we have, of course, Emily Curry-Pryor is Executive Director of Data2X, an NGO that works to accelerate the production and use of gender data to advance gender equality. Emily has built and led a variety of startups, including the UN Foundation's initiatives on women's economic empowerment and Girl Up campaign. She has worked in the private sector, where she managed corporate philanthropy and started her career at the American Red Cross. And last but not certainly not least, we're really privileged to have and very lucky to have Thomas Gass with us today. He is the Assistant Director General and Head of the South Cooperation Department of Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. And furthermore, since 2019, Thomas is serving as co-chair representing the OECD DAC constituency within the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation. He brings with him a wide range of experience in bilateral and multilateral development cooperation. So a big welcome to you all, our panelists today. So let me start with, now that we have introduction out of the way, let me start with you, Johannes. And the big question for you is that you just managed to launch this very impressive PREP 2019 report. And would you tell us a little bit about what is it, what are the main findings of the report? Johannes, over to you for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Shaida. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm very privileged to be here and to take part in this important webinar on how to improve the funding for data for development. So you asked me about the press report. First of all, I would like to say, what does press actually stand for? It stands for Partner Report on Support to Statistics. It's a report that PARIS21 publishes more or less since then 10 years as an annual report that provides you with information of how much money bilateral and multilateral donors are actually giving to statistics. It has mainly two objectives. One is it's an advocacy tool because we can show that we can advocate for more and better funding through tracking projects and to be very clear information on where the money is actually going when we support data and statistics. It's very useful for improving coordination between different donors. We have lots of disaggregated information here, information in which specific areas, be it health, be it education, be it environment, in which sectors donors are investing, and also in which countries they are investing. So you could eventually detect donor preference with respect to data and statistics. So this is a great tool. It's a report that you can download from our website, but you can also play a bit with the numbers. So I really would like to invite those people who are interested to go to our website. Now, you were asking me, what are the main messages from PRESS 2019? And I would like to give three. I would like to give a good news, I would like to give a bad news, and I would like to give a challenge for all of us. Now, let me start with the good news and to be framed as a very optimistic message. Between 2016 and 2017, ODA given official development aid given to data and statistics rose by 11% to $689 million per year. This is a significant increase, which is mainly driven by the adaptation of the Sustainable Development Goals monitoring framework. This is good news. And it's also good news that we have now more money given to gender statistics. We have really seen here a significant increase in support to projects that support gender statistics. So in a nutshell, this is the good news. Now, what's the bad news? The bad news is, and you said it in your introductory remarks, Shaida, it's by far not enough to meet the needs that we have. Now, then you might ask, how do you know what the needs are? Well, I think we as data and statistical community, we have done our homework. There is a fantastic plan which is called the Cape Town Action Plan to support data and statistics, which underpins the SDGs. And this Cape Town Action Plan has been costed. And it basically, we would need 600 million more per year to have the money in place to implement the Cape Town Action Plan. So in that sense, we need really to strengthen our efforts to get that additional money, being able not only to measure and monitor the SDGs, but to strengthen national statistical systems. So in that sense, we also need not only to have more money, but also to have better money spent for national statistical offices to help them to produce data that can make a difference to people. Now, the last point I wanted to make is in terms of the challenge. The challenge is, it's not only, we talked about more money, we talked about better money, we also have to see the distribution of aid. And as it is with sectors linked to, for instance, fighting extreme poverty or fighting inequality, unfortunately, also in the area of data and statistics, we see that the poorest countries are left behind. There are quite a few countries that are currently really left behind by bilateral and multilateral support for data and statistics. Now, how do we know this? Well, we measure the funding of national strategies for development of statistics. These are called NSDSs. These are very important strategic plans, which basically is a framework for developing data and statistics in a given country. The NSDS is linked to national development plans, which of course reflects the wishes of the country, the different stakeholders ideally, and the SDGs. So 89 countries have fully funded NSDSs, and those countries are more or less the higher income and the middle income countries. We lack a fully funded NSDS in poor countries, in, for instance, specific islands, in countries that are small islands and that are left behind. So we need also to focus on this. So let me wrap up, Shaida. Good news, we have done a step forward, but we need to really increase change if we want to make the Agenda 2030 happening. We need more and better data to measure those things. And for this, we need more and better funding. And the Press 2019 paths and shows a couple of messages how this can be done.
Thank you, Johannes. And I think, as you said, being cautiously optimistic is a good strategy for now. We have to be optimistic, but we also have to be cautious. And thanks to the team that produces Press 2019, because it's really a valuable tool, and it shows us not only the data about the data, but also what we need to do to improve the data to monitor aid for statistics. Thank you very much. I'm wondering whether my colleague Ayush is already here, or whether we're still waiting for her to connect. Yeah. Hello, Ayush. I see you there. Good to see you. So would you like to go next, or do you want me to give you a little bit more time? Okay. You need more time?
Hi, I'm so sorry for being late. I just had a lot of traffic here in Mongolia. So can I skip for the next?
Okay, sure, absolutely. So we'll move on to we skip Ayush and we move on to Thomas. Thomas, you know, and what we need, you know, to do to get closer to making sure there is a case for financing for data. So my question for you today is regarding the issue of the global internet from the global international perspective. As a bilateral donor, why is it important from your perspective that recipient countries improve their data and statistics? And why do you think data for development isn't attracting the donor funding that it requires? Over to you, Thomas, for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shaida, and everyone who's watching us and listening to us today, and also Great to be on the panel with Ayush and Sandy and Emily. So it's really a great pleasure to be here. We're in a time of tight budgets. Public funding is under pressure in all parts of the world. And so the question is always being asked, why should we invest into something? Why should we invest into strengthening data and statistical systems? And I think that it's never a waste of time to spend time on this narrative, because whatever our constituency is, we'll have to speak to that narrative. Now, Johannes just mentioned it, 11% increase in funding for data and statistics. That's a great progress. But he also mentioned that the 2030 agenda had a lot to do with it. Why does it have so much to do with it? Because we now have a shared vision of humanity, a shared vision of what globalization should bring to humanity. And I think we need to uphold that. We need to know why these sustainable development goals are important. That they are not important because they are an academic intellectual exercise that was done by the UN with some stakeholders. Important because they acknowledge that we are interconnected in a way that we have never been before, and that if we don't all move together, we will not achieve sustainable development. So why should we have better data and better statistics at the country level? Of course, to tell us whether we're moving in the right direction, but also whether our steering decisions as donors, but even more so as the countries in which the development is actually happening, we need to know whether these decisions are the right ones, whether they're having an impact, whether they're having outcomes, whether we're moving the needle on the dial of international development. That is so important. And if we are not able to tell our constituencies, our taxpayers, our parliaments, that we're actually making a difference, they're not going to want to fund not just statistics and data, but they're not even going to be ready to fund development cooperation processes and ODA in general. Now, if you allow me, I want to just drill down one level further and say why data and statistics is so critical to sustainable development goals, to the Agenda 2030 as a whole. It is because in my opinion, the two big challenges linked to the 2030 agenda are firstly to make sure that the 2030 agenda becomes a social contract between the governments and their people. The 2030 agenda and the sustainable development goals, they have to strengthen that relationship between duty bearers and rights holders. And if that is to happen, information has to be part of it. Governments have to be able to present to the people what they are doing for them. The people have to understand how their livelihoods are being improved, what the government is doing. That is all about data and statistics. But do you notice something? It's not about data and statistics for the donors or for the governments. It's data and statistics for the people. And so I think that we're not, today's discussion cannot only be about how can we get more funding for data and statistics. We also must make sure that these data and statistics systems are really catering to the needs of the people and strengthening that relationship between duty bearers and rights holders. Now, the second big challenge linked to the implementing the sustainable development goals is, of course, this promise of leaving no one behind. It's not just a promise that was there. That promise has a very strong link to the nature of sustainable development, because in 2015, through Agenda 2030, sustainable development was redefined. Actually, there is a principle that now says that if a significant economic or social group is left behind, our development is not going to be sustainable. Now, that means that in whatever work we do, we have to understand who the most vulnerable are, why they are vulnerable, what kind of risks they are facing. Now, that cannot be provided without proper, inclusive data and statistics. But again, as you can tell, Shaida, linking a condition to it. Again, I'm saying it's not just about more money to data, but I want to see data that disaggregates, that shows the vulnerabilities, that shows what kind of risks vulnerable people are facing. I want to see data that also the externalities of our development paths more visible. So yes, we need more data, we need more statistics, we need more funding for it, but we must make sure that data and statistics also delivers against these requirements.
Thanks, Thomas. And I think for the second part of the question that we had, which is on why do you think the data for development isn't attracting the donor funding that it requires, is because we haven't made the case as well as you just made it for us. Is that what you're telling us?
I think, right. Maybe additionally, I should say that the development cooperation landscape is overpopulated with themes and with priorities and with mainstreaming certain themes and principles, etc. And so if you want to raise money for one specific issue, it's always going to be very, very tough. We need to place our money where it can deliver on the Agenda 2030 as a whole. And I think that makes it somewhat difficult to raise money just for data. So we'll maybe get back to that later. And I'm so glad Ayush is there also, because Mongolia is obviously a very strong partner of ours in development cooperation. Maybe we can say a little bit what some of our vision is in future on how we can strengthen the data systems at a national level.
Thank you. Thanks, Thomas. That's a very good segue to Ayush, who I hope is now ready to for us to turn to you. And the question that we have for you, Ayush, is what, if any, evidence of Johannes was just telling us that we are seeing a cautious, optimistic increase in the level of ODA. So the question is whether you're seeing some of this increase for data and statistics in Mongolia and support for data and statistics in Mongolia, and what are some of the current challenges and opportunities for scaling up funding for data and statistics in your country. Ayush, we give you 5 minutes. Thank you. You're still muted, I think. Can you unmute yourself? Good, go.
Hi, everyone. I see we are having 63 participants of the WebEx. Good evening, good day, and good morning to all of you. What I like to say is that statistics is actually key to document the past, evaluate today, and determine the future. So it is really the mirror of the society, mirror of history, what we have today. As for Mongolia, the National Statistical Office is 95 years old, so it is quite old, quite one of the first organizations that have been established. You know, the people are very professional. They are producing all the data that they have produced since years. But the main challenge was that actually the users' behavior is changing. That until maybe 20 years ago, people used to read newspapers, to watch only one line of TV and hear to the radio. But nowadays, people mostly get information on social media. And for Mongolia, for example, we are kind of in our region the most open, and we have the most users of the social media, and especially Facebook. So that's why we have changed the strategy of dissemination of our produced data. So we have modernized our website. We made it more colorful, made it more user-friendly, put all the data that we have for free and in open data format. A lot of infographics, a lot of scientific works, and we started to explain the data with a really easygoing language, with the story behind it, touching heart stories. This raised the awareness of statistics, official statistics, and raised the users of the website even 5 times. And we've been, you know, I always love to like to say it locally and at the international events, that Open Data Watch is actually the organization that enables all national statistical offices to work through their websites on coverage and openness of the data that they produce. And seeing last 3 years evaluation, we have really a lot improved our website on meanings of openness and on coverage of the data, that we are regionally #1 and on place 11 worldwide out of 186 countries. This means also, you know, that the not only policy decision makers, but also general public and general users are getting more information, using more statistical data, especially official statistics, which means the value of the data is only then when it is used. And especially in terms of global initiative, or the global vision of Sustainable Development 17 goals, having 169 targets and 244 indicators, which we have to, you know, produce, evaluate in terms of how we are ongoing with the global 17 goals. Statistical offices are now a lot more in center of attention rather than to the MDG times. At our government level, when we talk about SDGs, it is actually talking at the global level, global sustainable development SDG goals. But if the goals are not mirrored on local level, on countries level, on you know, to the smallest units of the countries, it is difficult that it will not be kind of mirrored also into the policies of the governments. So that's why the collective vision has to also being implemented at the local level, so that the people would have possibility of achieving or even evaluating the progress on SDG, on 17 goals. National statistical offices are very essential for national developments. So we are the ones who provide reliable and relevant data, and we are the professional ones. And it is statistics is benefiting to everyone. It is important to say that it is not only for the policy decision makers, but also for the civil society, businesses, development partners. The more we make the data meaningful and helpful for not only policy decision makers, but also civil service, civil society and development partners, the more financing, investing into the data we get. Seeing for Mongolia, the raising of the awareness of statistical data, a lot of government ministries have started to build units on statistics. So they are also investing into the statistical, into the system, not only National Statistical Office, but into the system. Thanks,
Ayush. We're running short of time, so
okay.
If you want to wrap up, sorry to interrupt.
Mm-hmm. So we'll have to, and it is sure in this world of huge data amount, we have a lot of data there which is not used. So partnership is very important, and national statistical offices are not the only ones who are producing data and statistics. So there have to be collaboration, cooperation, partnerships. And we have to continue to make the case for better funding vis-a-vis with other government priorities, but donors also have to see the value of the data.
Thank you, Ayush. I think those are really, really important and practical experience from underground. And it's really good to hear that you are working on increasing the use and the value of data. I really believe that that is the way of what I call breaking the vicious cycle. So thanks, Ayush. We'll come back to you with more questions on that. So let me turn to you, Emily, and you're representing a very important part of the sustainable development, which is improving gender data. So the question for you is, how does gender data fit into these discussions around financing for development data? And from where you sit, is there currently enough financing and funding for gender data? Emily, you have 5 minutes. Thanks.
Sure, great. Well, so I feel like it's an honor to be here and to speak with all of these panelists and to listen to all that you have to say. I found myself getting so absorbed in that I started forgetting what I wanted to say. But I was really reflecting on some of the last parts of what Ayush was saying around all of the different groups that are really required to be participating in this conversation around improving data and statistics and why. And that, yes, there are the professionals who are technical experts in data and statistics, but that there's such a broader community that really has to be engaged in this. And that's certainly where Data 2X comes in as a global advocate, really working on not only some of the technical challenges around improving gender data, but also really making the case and advocating for increasing both production and the use of gender data. And Ayush, when you were talking, I was reflecting on, there's this American movie from many years ago now, but where they said, one of the lines is, "Help me help you." And that's how I feel all the time, is help me help this community to continue to do the really critical job that needs to happen for all of development data, but certainly gender data as a critical part in that. I don't think I have to probably convince the 63 people on this line that it's truly imperative that gender data be considered and included in any discussion about development data more broadly. I think it's great, linking back to something that Johanna said earlier, it's fantastic. I'm thrilled that gender statistics is seen as a bright spot and some of the good news in terms of increasing support, but certainly we still have a long road to go. If we want to be thinking about monitoring SDG progress broadly, gender data is going to be a very, very significant piece of that puzzle. And even where we are right now, I mean, we know that from estimates from UN Women that over 76% of the available gender data was generated before 2010, and only 22% of gender-specific indicators are produced regularly worldwide. So that tells us something about really where we are just on, and not only, you know, for data systems overall, but just for the SDG indicators, that we really have a gap in the kinds of information that we need in understanding gender data. And as a result of this, you know, knowing obviously from our vantage point that we see gender data as critical in being able to measure progress in gender equality as something that cuts across the full SDG agenda, obviously, there's going to be an issue and a pragmatic issue of funding in terms of filling the knowledge gap that we have on gender and gender equality. And so as a result, we, along with our partners, Open Data Watch, so we've been working quite closely with Shada and her team on this, really undertook a project and a piece of work to understand and to dig more deeply into understanding what the financing situation is for gender data currently. I also just want to note that this study and this information is not something we could have done without some really significant input from PARIS21, not only on the specific program of work on financing for gender data, but also the years of work that they have done on the press reports, which is always something that I am waiting eagerly to read each year. So really want to express my appreciation to Johannes and the team. So for this program of work that we did with Open Data Watch, we essentially went through a process of looking into the source data for understanding gender, looking at microdata, looking at CRVS, looking at censuses, looking at administrative sources. And by doing that, we came up with this idea of a core gender data system to really understand the full complement of, you know, you can't separate out necessarily gender from having a well-functioning CRVS system, for example. So we really, you know, specified that core gender data system, and you can see this in the paper. It's available easily online. We then went into an exercise, and the ODW team was really the specialist here, into how much it would cost for all of those systems to have the funding that they would need, and how much is currently going to those systems. And this is where so much of the work with PARIS21 and some others is truly critical. And then we calculated the gap that remained. So even with you know, gender statistics being a bright spot in terms of some increasing investment, we still estimate that it's going to take another 170 to 240 million every year between now and 2030 to fund and really shore up a quality gender data system. And so, you know, to answer your question, Shada, certainly gender data is very important in terms of the broader financing for development data conversation. And, you know, unfortunately, no, there's not currently enough financing and funding for gender data, even with the increases that we've seen. But I think to you know, think about what the road ahead is and what some of the bright spots are, or how do we work together. You know, I think one of the things that we need to be putting some of our collective action around is really galvanizing political action, engaging new communities. I think the 60 I haven't been able to see all of the organizations that they're in, but one of the things that I've watched since starting Data 2X is that there are more voices coming to the table. It's not only people who are specialists in data and statistics and in data production, but it's people who are really motivated around how do we answer the questions that we need to answer to make things better in this world and to achieve the SDG agenda. And that brings you know, a multiplicity of thought and new ideas around the table to how we can start working better to do that. So I think we have really an opportunity right now to galvanize more political action and more pressure to make funding development data overall more of a priority, and I would say gender within that. But I also really strongly agree with what Thomas was saying, that it's not only about, you know, getting more money, but it's about how do we do more with the money that we have? How do we really take ourselves through? And I think we might go there in the conversation, but how do we take ourselves not just from having this data, but using that data to really hold ourselves as a data community responsible for, once we have it, once we get that money that we need to actually measure all the things we want to measure, what then happens with that information to make a practical difference on people's lives. I'll stop there for now, Shada.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily. Wonderful, wonderful summary of a great number of points and important points and work behind this work stream, as you mentioned. So I'm now going to move to question and answers. I was going to do one more round of follow-up questions to the panelists, but we're running short of time. So for the last 20 minutes, I have some really good questions on the chat. So I'm going to start one for you, Thomas, and let me find it. It was a very good question. Here we go. Thomas, the question coming for you is, given the current budgetary constraints, how would you convince other donors to support data systems? And what concrete steps would you encourage them to take? Would you like to take that on for a couple of minutes? Thank you.
Thank you. That's indeed a very good question. And actually, Ayush already answered it to some extent. Namely, by saying that the goals and the work that is being done at the national level has to be mirrored at the local level. You see, people need to be convinced that data is bringing something for them. So as a representative of a donor agency, what I would want to see before I invest into a statistics system, firstly, data and statistics is a priority to that country in itself, meaning that data and statistics has a space on that country's budget. Secondly, that the national statistics system has a certain independence and credibility. Thirdly, that there are attempts, as Ayush was saying, that the data is being broken down and is being mirrored down to the national level, and that the information is being provided to the people in a way that they can access it. So if I see those kind of efforts in the national system, then I can easily convince my own, let's say, constituency, my own parliament, that this is a good investment to place into. Said it will always be difficult to just provide new funds in one central place. So I know that it's important to calculate these funding gaps, and I appreciate what Emily said about, you know, needing 170 to 240 million a year more. I think it'll be very difficult to get the donor community to just put that additional money into one place, in addition to what they're already doing on education and what they're already doing on health, etc. However, what we can all do is we can make sure that the data that we generate in our projects is properly connected with the national system. We can also make sure that when we prepare a new project or a new program with a program country, that together we make it a compulsory for our consultants and our stakeholders to think about how that project and those programs can also strengthen the national data and statistics system, so that it's not just a project that provides output and outcomes in terms of better services in health or in education or something in infrastructure, but at the same time, every project actually has to provide a link to the national data and statistics system and actually strengthen the data that is available to the national system and to its people.
Thanks, Thomas. That's really, really important, as how we can connect the systems at the national level so that they can feed to each other and actually benefit from each other's development. And that's a huge cost saving also from what you said earlier on how we can do better with what we have. So, Johannes, we have a very good question for you. And the question is, what do you mean by better funding? Is it about better coordination? And if so, what is, in your opinion, is a proper tool for better coordination? Over to you for a couple of minutes.
Sure. Well, thanks so much. This is a great question. And so what is behind eventually better funding? I think it has several elements. First, we actually have in some countries and for some sectors, we have quite a bit of money going also to data and statistics globally. For instance, in education and health, which have been featured fairly highly on the agenda of the MDGs. Now look at other sectors, like for instance, agriculture for a very long time, or employment, unpaid work, informality. We hardly have any data. So I think we need to look very carefully into different sectors on the one hand, but also in terms of regional distribution. Some countries do far better than other countries. And also, as Thomas has said, some countries can also do better by themselves. So I think the better funding would also need to look into domestic resource mobilization issues. Countries have actually been able to mobilize resources from their own budget. This can be matched up eventually with money from donors, and which countries can't because the country is just too poor. We have a couple of countries, maybe around 50, 60, which are so desperately poor and fragile, they just can't produce the numbers that we are asking them to produce. And this maybe leads me to another point. It's about the public good of official statistics. I think this is a point we haven't stressed enough in international debates, because often we ask, what is the value for the data? What is the use for the data? The money you get. But wait a second. Some of the SDGs, I would say, are public goods. We are asking countries to provide data for international monitoring purposes that we can all benefit from, for instance, in the debate of climate, for instance, in the debate of health, tackling diseases, or terrorism, or migration issue, or whatever. So, but you need to give some money to those countries that have barely anything. So in that sense, I think we have to do both. As Thomas was saying, very much agree on what he proposed, but I think we also have to have this international public good component into any funding scheme. And let me maybe conclude, because you were asking, or the question that was asked was also about coordination. The saying is, everybody is for coordination, but nobody wants to be coordinated. We know this. And to some extent, we have to respect the realities of how international support works. However, I think we have a unique opportunity with the upcoming World Data Forum in Bern in 2020 in October, where all the different agencies, institutions, nationally, globally will meet. And that would be a fantastic opportunity to eventually agree on some key commitments to do things better. And those key commitments could entail some sort, I think Thomas said it at some point in time, a clearinghouse, or you can even say an application, a matching application. On the one hand, we could see what is the demand side? What do countries really want? They put forward as national plans. And on the other side, we could see what is the supply? What is on offer? And we could do this with the technology we have nowadays. We could visualize this. We could do a great matching application. And then we could try to see, hey, can we bring this in line? So not everything goes to country X in sector C, but it's more equally distributed. So I think with the Bern action agenda that currently a group of institutions are working on for the World Data Forum, we have a fantastic opportunity to make a change here.
Thanks, Johannes. And I'll come back to you and maybe to Thomas to tell us a little bit more about the Bern network. But I'm getting really good questions on the chat. So I wanted, Ayush, you wanted to come in on this point? You were signaling something to me? No, I can't. I'll go on. I'll come back to you in a minute. So we have a very good question for Emily. Emily, the question is that sectors such as health and gender have brought in some new donors to financing data and supporting developing countries. How can this be sustained and perhaps even scaled up?
Great. Thank you for that question. And I noticed in the chat there was another really good one around kind of the trends, with this increase in resources for gender statistics. What is the strategy? How has that happened? I think I'll speak specifically to gender rather than health that was raised in the first question. But I mean, although I do think the two are certainly intertwined, I think that part of how they're explained, this kind of trend and this increase has definitely been by some concerted effort. I mean, I can say I've been working my tail off for the last several years on this, but I think a lot of people have been focused on it. But I think that, and now I don't remember if it was Thomas or Johannes that made this point earlier, but that the SDGs have, created some, galvanizing force and really, because it's been a shared agenda and the world's agenda, and because there are various ways that we need to be measuring this, it's motivating people, I think, to think more about what that means, about how we're going to do those things, how we're going to measure, whether it's on gender or it's on health or it's on other pieces of the agenda. And so I think that it's been about kind of harnessing some of that and figuring out ways to rally people around a shared agenda. And I think from a gender perspective, that certainly has been what we've tried to do, and trying to really create an environment where there's room for all sorts of different types of people at the table, that it's not only about people with a certain level of technical training, right, but that there are all sorts of dimensions of the data ecosystem, as it were, that really have to be engaged. I think in terms of thinking about ways to do more and to sustain this, I think that is a really important and critical point, and something that I feel like I heard Thomas saying as well, and that I wanted to underscore, is that if we want to sustain this, or if we even want to improve it and increase it, right? Because we're still not where we need to be from a gender data perspective. And certainly when we talk about disaggregating data, that is an essential place, at least a starting point for us. We're not going to be able to sustain that if we can't continue to show why it's valuable and why it matters, and what difference it makes in people's lives at the end of the day. So, for example, we, I think, as a community, have to really commit to what are those use cases. How do we trace? I know that this is in so many people's heads on this webinar, and so many of the people that we work in, some very clear examples of when, in this case, gender data, where having gender data led to some sort of a policy change or impact on people's lives. And the more of those kinds of examples that we can have, that we can share, not only in communities, kind of the data community, but the policy community and the high level influencer community. The more that we can do that, I think, whether that's on gender or it's on health or it's on data as a public good, the more that we can do that, the more we'll be able to sustain energy and attention to this agenda.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Emily. That's great advice and strategy to move forward. So on the last 5 minutes of our webinar, I wanted to go back to all the panelists, maybe 1 minute each, but starting with you, Ayush, on any closing remarks from you, but in particular, kind of, what is your cautionary optimism for this line of work for us, and any advice that you have, and what are the key things that you think we should focus on for going forward, and any advice from for those of us working as part of the Burn Network. So Ayush, going to you, 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I would like to say only the data that is used making sense makes an impact to the better lives of people is much of value. So in regard of having smart investments, which means it would be profitable, it would make smart decisions, make people's life better, you need evaluation, baseline setting, midterm review, goal setting. If you do not know whether you have smart investments or not, it doesn't, So in regards to achieve better achievement, of course, only statistical data or evaluation is needed. So, and as I said, the donors, the project, the organizations that are starting projects in each and in the country ABC. For example, in Mongolia, when they start a project with the government, they say we need a baseline, we need the survey. So that's why we need a survey done by statistical office, because we need to raise the capacity of statistical office that they would then evaluate it on their own way after the project also. So the project would have a long-term life. Also for SDGs, I think it is not ending with the SDGs. So it is important to think in long term and beyond 2030. So building the capacities of national statistical offices or the systems would benefit us not only until 2030, but also beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ayush. Emily, a quick closing remark from you.
Yes, I mean, I think I've pretty much already said it in terms of my plea for thinking about practical examples and how data leads to change. But one other related point I would make as we think about engaging new donors in this. So it's about bilaterals, but it's about other types of donors as well. One of the things I think we need to keep in mind that would be great to see us talk about at the World Data Forum in Bern is how timelines and expectations around timelines are different as you engage more kinds of donors in this debate. And we have to be able to not only give examples that are very accurate about the length of time that it takes for data systems to change, but find kind of creative ways to communicate kind of interim impacts and things that can happen over the short term that are critical for long-term data systems change, because we have to figure out a way to balance the timeline realities of new and non-traditional donors with some of our kind of longer range investment counterparts in governments. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Well said, Emily. Johannes, going to you for your closing remarks.
Sure, great pleasure. This is a fantastic webinar, so thanks so much, Shaida, for sharing it. Just very quickly, three points. First, making the case for data for development. I think we have come a long way. 10 years ago, nobody could have imagined a webinar about this topic. So we have come a long way. There is a lot of demand for more and better data. This is a good success, and we should continue to lobby for it. We also have done a good job, I think, on how to do it. I mean, in terms of thinking about data for development in countries for international purposes. We have good ideas, studies, how much does it cost? We also have good ideas on how it can be done. We talk about a financing facility. We have different institutions looking at it. The OECD had started a work stream on this. There's a high-level group of the United Nations Statistical Commission. There's so many different actors now rallying up to this call for making it happen. And last but not least, we just need to do it. We have a unique opportunity at the World Data Forum. We have a Bern network on financing for development data. And we really would like to extend an open invitation to all the colleagues on the call to join us, the Bern network, that is basically helping try to set commitments up that can be agreed by the participants at the World Data Forum around the topics we have here discussed. Thank you.
Thank you, Johannes. And over to you, Thomas. We're giving you the last word.
Thank you. Very privileged. But I want to actually underscore something Johannes said just now. And in the same vein as Emily, I think we need to be honest about where our blind spots are in terms of data. And I'm assuming the 63 participants are like the choir, or people who already acquired and who know it's important. We need to be honest about where our blind spots are, and we need to be able to explain why it is harmful to have these blind spots. And Emily did it very well on gender, but there are others. We need to also be careful of systems that hide the blind spots. I'm particularly wary of ranking, like scores that rank countries tend to give the impression that everything is hunky-dory in the back in terms of the data. as long as we are in the high ranks of any ranking. And I think that that's very dangerous. So we need to communicate clearly with our societies, with our people about data systems. Finally, I'd like to echo what Johannes said. This is our chance. I mean, data and statistics has never been so attractive as in the last 4 or 5 years. And we have to seize this opportunity. It's not always going to be like that. And so let's really make sure that these next 12 and 24 months are used to accelerate the interest and to broaden this community about that, and making sure that the whole development cooperation community is on board, but also much broader parts of our society. I'm certainly going to use my position as co-chair of the Global Partnership on Effective Development Cooperation of the GPEDC to make sure that the GPEDC comes on board in a strong way for this data and statistics agenda.
Thank you. Thanks, Thomas. And we're certainly counting on you. And well, this is the end of our webinar. I wanted to, for everyone to join me to thank our amazing, amazing panelists for this really rich conversation around more and better financing. So do look us up for the next webinar, and we have some good plans for you between working with PARIS21. And again, thank you to all of you who joined us, and thanks to Thomas, Ayush, Emily, and Johannes, and the whole PARIS21 and ODW team behind it that have been working to put this webinar together. All the best to you. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to all of you. Bye.